Welcome to Explore Classroom. My name is Gibbs Kuguru. I'm a shark scientist, National Geographic explorer, and your host for today. We are so excited to have you join us. At National Geographic, we believe that anyone can be an explorer and that you have the power to make a difference in the world no matter how old you are. Many of you are tuning in as part of the Wildlife series. So thank you for joining us on our journey to learn about wildlife globally while taking action locally. And before we get into today's lesson, I'd like to welcome all of the following classes who are joining us today, especially Madrona Non-Graded School Zenith Center from Washington State, USA, Alpine School District from Utah, USA, Westmont Elementary School from Pennsylvania, USA, St. Louis School from Tennessee, USA, and finally, Pinewood Elementary School from Canada. Today's explorer is biologist and researcher Felicity Muth. Felicity studies animal behavior with a focus on bumblebees in North America. She's part of the Wildlife Intelligence Project, which is a group of explorers that seek to understand the minds and behaviors of animals inspired by the groundbreaking work of the famous scientists Jane Goodall and the Templeton Prize. She's also written a children's book about bee diversity called Am I Even a Bee? Felicity is originally from London, England, and studied at the University of St. Andrews, Edinburgh, in Scotland. Now she lives in California, where she's an assistant professor at the University of California, Davis. Her recent fieldwork takes her not too far from her home to a place called Soda Springs, where she visits sites just like this one to observe wild bees in an effort to understand how their surrounding environment impacts how they learn and make decisions. We are so excited to have Felicity here with us today, live, to answer all of your questions. But first, Felicity is going to take us into the field to tell us about how she's doing bumblebee research across different sites in Nevada and California. Students, be on the lookout.
Hi, I'm Dr. Felicity Muth, and I'm a bumblebee researcher and a National Geographic explorer. And as part of being a bumblebee researcher, I get to work in beautiful meadows like this one here. So I work on public land in Nevada and California. This is a meadow in California. So I study bumblebee cognition, which basically means I'm trying to work out how bumblebees think. And so bumblebees are animals just like a dog or a cat or even a human, and we all think about our worlds differently. And so I'm trying to work out what bumblebees think when they're navigating their worlds. And so a lot of what bumblebees do is visit flowers to collect nectar and pollen. And when they visit these flowers, they learn a lot about the flowers that they visit. They learn about the color and the shape and the smell of the flowers. And we use this to try and understand what they learn, when they learn, how they learn, why they learn. And by doing this, we hope to understand not only more about bee learning, but also about learning in other animals, including even humans. It's the end of the season now, so the flowers are mostly done. But during peak season, from April through to July and August, I use this net right here to go out and catch bumblebees. And so there are a few flowers left in this meadow, so I'm hoping we might be able to find a few bumblebees today. So generally speaking, the way that you catch a bee is you have your net and you walk around the meadow, and you look for flowers that you think bees might like. This one here, for example, this is one that I know that the bees like. And then I also have to listen really carefully, because different bees sound different from each other. So bumblebees have got a lower pitched buzz than the honeybees, and so I can hear specifically the bees that I want to catch. And then when I hear them or I see them, I use my net to grab a bee, just like this. So I just caught this male bumblebee, And the great thing about the males is that they don't sting. And so you've got to be pretty good at spotting the difference between the females, which do sting, and the males that don't sting. But it does mean that you can very gently grab a male bee and get a better look at him. Okay, so I'm going to let this fella go now. All right, bye, bee.
Wow, that was so cool. I'm actually wondering how long it took Felicity to get so good at that, especially with using the net. Because I mean, it took me a couple years to learn how to safely handle and release sharks. And I can imagine for an animal as small and delicate as a bee, you have to be even more careful. And I can't wait to learn even more about Felicity's work with bumblebees. So students, please welcome Felicity to the show. Felicity, we're so glad to have you here.
Hi, everybody.
All right, so you were most recently conducting research in that beautiful meadow in California, which makes me wonder about the role that geography plays in your research. Can you tell us, how do you pick your field sites?
Yeah, so there are bumblebees all around the world, but I choose to work on public land in Nevada and California because there are these beautiful meadows with lots of wildflowers that are relatively untouched by humans. And so we have amazing bumblebee diversity in this part of the world.
Oh, so interesting. All right, students, before we learn more from Felicity, I actually have a question for you. So teachers, get close to your keyboards so that you can answer for your class. We're going to show you images of 3 different landscapes. And my question is, based on what we know so far, if you were to pick a field site for Felicity to find and observe bees, which one would you say is the best spot? It looks like A is a urban setting with some gardens in it. B is a concrete jungle. And C is a blossoming meadow. So again, the question is, which of these landscapes on screen do you think would be the best spot to find bees? You should see a poll on your screen, so choose the answer that best represents what your class thinks. I'll give you a minute. All right, so actually every single one of you listed C as your answer. Felicity, how did they do? Can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, so the answer is C. You got it right. Wildflower meadows are amazing places for bees like bumblebees. But just because an environment is a city, is an urban environment, doesn't mean that you can't also have great diversities of bees. So if you look at the picture A, we can see that in this city, we also have flowers being grown. And in these kinds of places, you can also get a lot of bees.
Wow, so planting flowers can actually attract bees to a city area. Interesting. All right, that was way too easy for all of you students. You did really well. So we have another question for you. We're going to show you 2 more pictures. And the question this time is, which environment do you think has the greatest diversity of bees? Is it A, the tropics, or B, the desert? Teachers, you should see a poll on your screen again, so choose the answer that best represents what your class thinks. I'm going to pause again and give you a little bit of time to choose your answer. All right, so about 75% of you chose the tropics, and the other 25% chose desert. Felicity, how do these guys do?
So the answer is actually B, the desert. But if you guessed A, this is actually a really good guess because most of the time when we're talking about animals and plants, the greatest diversity is in the tropics. And you do get a lot of different bees in the tropics. But bees are kind of unusual in that the greatest diversity is actually in the desert. And so there are around 20,000 species of bee worldwide, around 4,000 species where I live in North America. And a lot of those species in North America are in Nevada and Utah and Arizona and the more deserty parts of the United States. And why this is? Well, bees really like flowers, and in the deserts, you get a lot of different flower species close to the ground. And this could lead to the evolution of many different specialist species. Also, most of these species nest in the ground, and it could be that there's a lot of good nesting sites in the desert. And so when I'm out looking for bees, one way that I do this is I keep a map of wherever I find bees so that it's easier for me to try and find them again in the future.
Wow, these are the hallmarks of a true explorer, tracking animals using maps. I love it. Fantastic work, students, on that question. And thank you, Felicity, for sharing all of this great information. So now that we know where to look for bees, I think we're now ready to learn how to identify a bee versus other insects. Felicity, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so there are a few different things that you can do to spot a bee from other insects. Because there are a lot of insects that mimic bees. And so they look a little bit like bees. And at first you might be like, oh, this is a bee. But actually, it might be a different insect. And why insects mimic bees is because many insects don't have stings. You know, flies don't have stings. And so by mimicking a bee, they can look much scarier than they would otherwise. So can we get some pictures of these insects?
That's actually a fascinating fact. So by imitating the bees, they actually can scare other animals that might want to eat them or hurt them away.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very good defense. The number of times I've seen people out at a picnic and been like, there's a bee, and it's not a bee at all, it's just a fly. So it's a very good defense that those insects have. Okay, but some of the ways that you can spot bees. So this picture here on the left is a bee, it's our honeybee. And on the right, we have a fly, a fruit fly. And this is a little bit hard to see, but bees have 4 wings, whereas flies only have 2 wings. And so in the picture on the left, you might be able to just about see there are 2 wings kind of on top of each other. So the bee has 4 wings in total. Another way you can spot bees is that when they sit still, when they're landed, their wings are often crossed over on top of each other. And so on the left here, we have a bumblebee and its wings are crossed over. Whereas on the right, this looks a bit like a bee, but it's actually a fly that is mimicking a bee. And so the fly's wings are open. And when flies sit still, their wings often rest open like that. So another clue of whether something is a bee or a fly are the eyes. And so all bees have got 2 big eyes on the sides of their heads. And then if you look at this picture on the left here, if you look really closely, you might see there are these 3 little eyes, and we call them ocelli. These are 3 little eyes in the middle, like top of the bee's head. Whereas flies just have these 2 big eyes that often join in the middle. So this picture on the right here, it's called a bumblebees fly. And it again is kind of pretending to be a bumblebee. It's very fuzzy. But if you look at the eyes, you'll see there are these 2 really big eyes that join in the middle, which tell me that it's a fly. And finally, there are so many different types of bee, and these bees can look really different from each other. So we have green bees and blue bees and red bees and yellow bees. But nearly all bees carry pollen. And so if you look at these 3 pictures here, all of these are bees, and you can see that all of these bees have got some pollen on their legs.
Whoa, that is some fascinating stuff. Not everything looks like that. Looks like a bee is a bee. They don't have that swag with them. All right, students, I'd like to test your knowledge based on what Felicity has just shared with us right now. So teachers, get close to your keyboards again so you can answer the question for your class. We're going to show you a picture on the screen, and we want to know Is it a bee or is it not a bee? All right, here's the first one. Based on what we've learned from Felicity, is this a bee or is this not a bee? Teachers, type your students' answers into the chat. Let's see these answers coming in. All right. So Fulton School says B. Mrs. Mark's class says yes, this is a B. KJHS says B. A lot of B's. B, 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 B. And now I sound like a bee. Zenith Center also says B. I think the answer is unanimous. Felicity, how do they do?
Yeah, they did really well because this is our honeybee. So honeybees are often the first bee that people will think of when you say think of a bee. And that's because as humans, we domesticated these bees. People have been breeding them for hundreds and hundreds of years because we use their honey, of course, and we also use them to pollinate many of our crops that we eat. And so this species is actually from Europe. It was brought over to North America. It's not originally from the Americas, but we have it all over here now because of using it to pollinate our crops.
Nice. All right, next picture. Is it a bee or is it not a bee? What do you guys say? Ooh, Alessandro and Amelia said not a bee. Fulton School says not a bee. McNear Elementary fifth grader says this is a fly. A lot of not a bee. Miss Ellen Adams gave the explanation no. Wings are out and eyes aren't in the right position. Okay. Looks like a very astute morphological evaluation from there. And Mrs. Bucci's fourth graders also says, no, you can tell by the eyes and the wings. All right. Everyone is saying this is not a bee, and they actually gave some cool reasons for it. Felicity, can you tell us what it is?
Yeah, you guys are too good. This is a fly. So, on first glance, if you see the kind of orange and black, you might think it's a bee, but yeah, as you all got it right, the wings are clearly open like a fly. It has these large eyes that kind of go on the top of its head and meet in the middle. Another clue that I didn't mention is that it has these really, really tiny antennae, whereas bees have much larger antennae. And then it's also not very fuzzy. And this isn't always a clue that it's a bee, but it often is a clue. Bees tend to have a bit of fuzz on them. And this one is definitely not fuzzy.
Right on. Great answers, everyone. Okay, what do we have next? All right. Well, this interesting looking insect here. Is it a bee or is it not a bee? All right, answers are already coming in. Miss Mrazowski's class says yes. Fulton School Upper Elementary says B. Rio del Sol, fourth grade, says B. Wilcox Wildcat says B. I am not seeing any answers that are not B. Mrs. Ellen Adams' class says yes, it's a B because the wings are crossed. A lot of morphologists out here. I love this, guys. Okay, Felicity?
Yeah. So again, it seems like you all got it right. This is a bee. And so the big clues to me are, yeah, the wings are kind of crossed on its abdomen. If you look at the back leg, it's kind of fuzzy, which is probably where this bee keeps its pollen. And if you look at its head, it's got these two big eyes on the sides of its head. And if you look really closely, you can just about make out the little eyes, the three little eyes on top of its head.
Very cool. I love those fuzzy legs. This one looks quite fuzzy. Okay, guys. Last picture. Tell me, is it a bee or is it not a bee? Oh, all right. Fulton School Upper Elementary says not a bee, and so does Mrs. Foster's class, Mrs. Mrozowski's class. Trefford Way Middle School says not a bee. Look at the wings. Look at the wings. Interesting. Mrs. Strauss's third grader says the wings also are not crossed, so it is not a bee. All right. Mrs. Ellen Adams says the wings are different and so are the eyes. Man, you guys are really sharp. but actually I have no idea. Is this a bee or is this not a bee, Felicity?
Yeah, so this is not a bee. And so maybe some of you have guessed what kind of insect this might be. This is actually a moth. And it's sometimes called a bumblebee moth because it is also mimicking bumblebees. And it's kind of fluffy. It's got the yellow and black, so it looks a little bit like a bumblebee. But the things that tell me that it's a moth are these really straight antennae that are kind of bigger at the end. And moths, as I'm sure many of you know, they tend to come out more at nighttime, and so they use smell a lot more than they use vision. And so they have these big antennae, but the eyes are really tiny, unlike bee eyes, which tend to be really big. And then the body is kind of a different shape. It's a very moth shape body it's got there.
Wow, fantastic work, students. You guys are masters at identifying bees. I had no idea. And now that we know where the bees are located, and you guys already pretty much figured out how to identify any kind of a bee, let's see how bees learn. Felicity, how do you study bee behavior back in the lab?
Yeah, so put your hand up if you've got a pet dog or maybe some other kind of animal that you have trained to do a trick. And so if you've done this in the past, one thing you might know is that often to get an animal to learn to do something, you have to give them a treat or a reward. And so say you tell your dog to sit, and then it sits and you give it a treat. And that's a way of training the dog. Okay, if I hear the word sit, I'll sit and I'll get a treat. And basically the same idea applies for when we're training a bee. And so I train bees to understand more about how they learn. And the reason I do that is because bees are really, really important. If you're eating a meal, then about 1 in every 3 mouthfuls will be thanks to the bees because they pollinate about 1/3 of the food that we eat. They're also so important for our ecosystems, for our wildflowers. They pollinate so many of the flowers that are out there, which then feed birds and other animals. And so by understanding more about how bees learn, it's useful information for then how we can best protect them. And so I'm going to show you a video of me training one of these bees. And so here I'm training a bee to learn that a smell is associated with a particular sugar reward. And so one of those strips of paper has this particular smell on it, and the other one has sugar. And so you can see the bee's tongue came out there, and she was really excited. Now this is a different smell, and this one has got water, and the bees don't really like water. So she tastes it, but then she turns around and walks away. So let's watch this video again. Here she is getting a particular smell with the sugar, and she's drinking it. You can see she's really excited about that sugar. And this is a queen bumblebee that we have here. And it's called the yellow-faced bumblebee. She's got this yellow face. And now here she is getting a different scent with that water, and she walks away. And so when I'm training a bee, I do this again and again and again. And actually very quickly she learns that one scent is rewarding. It has that sugary treat, and the other scent is not rewarding. And then if I want to test to be sure that the bee has learned that, I do something like this. So here I have 2 strips. One has one scent, one has the other. And you'll see she quickly smelled the one of them, but then she went and stuck her tongue out to the other strip. And when that tongue comes out, it shows me that she's expecting to find sugar. And actually, in this case, there's no sugar on either of those strips. But she's showing me that she has learned, okay, this particular scent has got this, I'm expecting that it's got sugar there.
Wow, that's insane. How long did it take you to do that experiment?
That was what I did this summer, actually.
Oh, right on. I mean, that is simply amazing to see how these bees learn. And I mean, what a marvel. I never knew an animal that small could be so smart. Thank you, Felicity, for bringing us into the field with you for an incredible look at your work. It's almost time for the question and answer portion of the show. But for those of you joining us for the Wildlife series, I hope you're ready to receive your next mission. Because this week, you will create a wildlife map. You will record the locations of the wildlife you observe in your community on a map. just like Felicity did with the bees, to find these ideal locations for her research. Your educators will have your instructions for this mission. Educators, please use the mission completion form to let us know about the work that your students are doing. We would love to give a special shout out to a few classes for completing last week's mission, which includes Neuro Bolivia from Bolivia, fourth graders from Solana Ranch, California, USA, Washington Elementary from Minnesota, USA, and Tuscaloosa Academy from Alabama, USA. Keep up the great work, guys. I love to see it. All right, now it's time to ask Felicity some of your questions. If you're watching on YouTube, send us your questions using the chat bar. We record all of them as they're sent in, so please send each question in only once. And teachers, please let us know who's asking the question so we can give your class or student a shout out. If you're watching on Zoom, use the hand raise function at the bottom of your screen to let me know that your class has a question. We'll call on as many classes as time allows, and if we call on you, remember to prepare a nice, loud voice to ask your question. And if you have any issues with your microphone, you can go ahead and type that question into the chat bar. All righty. So our first question from our audience comes from YouTube, and they're wondering, how do bees learn?
So the interesting thing is that bees learn in a very similar way to how we learn. So bees have got brains, they've got complex brains just like us. They're a lot smaller than our brains, but they're still pretty complex. And they have neurons in their brains just like us. And so the basic machinery behind how they learn is exactly the same as how we learn.
Oh, fascinating. Another question comes from Mrs. Day's class on YouTube, and they would like to know, how do bees pick the queen?
Yeah, so there are many different species of bee, and they don't all have a queen. Most bee species are actually what we call solitary. So there's just one bee who lays her eggs and has her offspring, and she's not part of a colony. Within honeybees that do have a queen, this is something that seems to be genetically determined, but the workers don't pick a queen. And then within bumblebees, we're not really sure, but it seems like the babies that get fed the most are the ones that become the queens.
Interesting. All right, question from YouTube. Noelle from OLLV, third grade, asks, how do bees build their hive? And a follow-up comes from Liam from Mrs. Robertson's, and they would also like to know, why are honeycombs hexagonal?
Yeah, so honeybee honeycombs, actually, I've got one of these right here as a prop, are hexagonal. And it's thought that it's because this is the most efficient shape that it can be. That if these were circles and you were trying to store honey in them, then there would be space between each circle. But being a hexagon, you can make use of all the possible space. Having said that, bumblebee colonies don't look like that. They look like total chaos. There are big pots, little pots, different shapes. But both honeybees and bumblebees make their colony through secreting wax. They have a special gland that is just under their chin, and sometimes actually between their segments, and they can secrete this wax that they use to build the colony.
Another question from YouTube and Miss Nickerson's class. How do the antennae work for sensing?
Yeah, so the antennae have got lots of tiny little olfactory neurons on them, and that they can detect scents. And bees are really, really good at it. So just like a dog, how a dog can detect all kinds of smells that we can't smell, because as humans, we're not actually very good at smelling stuff. Bees are a lot more like dogs in that they have many, many little olfactory neurons that allow them to detect a whole different range of smells.
Oh, that's cool. So they're like smelling all the way out there.
Yep.
Okay, and next, I'd love to get this question from Violet on YouTube from Miss Schiapelli's class. And she asks, when did you start wanting to learn about bees?
Yeah, and so when I was younger, when I was a kid in school, I absolutely loved all the animals. I loved insects and animals. And I then studied birds for a few years, and I really enjoyed that. I got to travel the world studying birds. And then I heard somebody else talk about bumblebees and how smart they are, all the things they could learn. And it just got me wanting to know more about them. And I've been working with bumblebees for over 10 years now, and there's still so many things that we have to learn about them.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm glad you did it because I've learned so many amazing facts about bees today. I'm going to be like, my mind is going crazy. Cool.
So I think it's good to remember that you can find bees just about everywhere. And there are so many different types of bee. And so it's really easy just to go out there and find bees for yourself. If you have access to a garden or a yard, you can look at flowers there or plant flowers and then the bees will come. But you don't even need that. You can go to local parks, you can go out in your neighborhood, and if you find wildflowers, then you will find bees. And one thing I really like to use is this app called iNaturalist. It has a website as well. And that's a way to take a photo of a bee or another insect or a plant. And then it'll tell you what it most likely is, the identification of it. And that's a really nice way to find out more about the insects that are in your neighborhood.
Right on. Thank you so much for that, Felicity. And for this iNaturalist app, we can download it on our phones and our iPods and iPads,
Yes.
and it's good for all species.
Yeah. And actually, it's particularly good for plants because plants don't move.
Good to know. I'm going to get myself a copy of iNaturalist. So yes, thank you again, students, for engaging with us and for your thoughtful questions. As I mentioned earlier, if you're participating as part of the wildlife series this week, your mission is to create a wildlife map. In your last mission, you observed the wildlife in a single location, and now for your next mission, you will record wildlife observations from around your community and put that on a map. And it will be wonderful to see what you guys discover about the wildlife that's all around you. Teachers, please use the educator guide to learn more about this mission. Next week, we will be joined by explorer and documentary filmmaker Ashika Faizi. She will take us into the world of wildlife filmmaking by telling us how she documents wild Asian elephants and their journey across human-made borders. Exciting stuff. Thank you, teachers, for bringing your class to our show. Share about your experiences on social media using the hashtag #ExplorerClassroom. And lastly, we would love to hear from you. So teachers, please take a moment to fill out this quick survey and let us know how you enjoyed today's show. The link for this is in the chat. So from all of us at National Geographic, have a wonderful day, stay curious, and keep exploring, and we'll see you next time on Explorer Classroom. All right. See you later, guys.
Bye, everybody.